They classified it as contamination. The same compound Roman viticulturists used to protect entire harvests is now restricted, licensed, marginalized. Copper sulfate, a crystalline salt that controlled fungal pathogens for millennia, increased yields by factors most modern farmers would consider impossible, and required nothing except copper, sulfur, and water. It was reclassified. Not because it stopped working, because it couldn't be patented. When archaeologists excavated grain storage facilities in ancient Egypt, they found residue. Copper compounds coating the interior surfaces of ceramic vessels dated to 2400 BCE. Chemical analysis revealed deliberate application, not accidental contamination. The Egyptians weren't decorating storage containers. They were engineering disease prevention systems. Fungal spores that devastated grain stores in humid conditions couldn't survive contact with copper ions. A simple treatment extended storage life from months to years, transforming seasonal surpluses into multi-year food security. Administrative records from the Old Kingdom document grain reserves lasting through consecutive drought cycles. That wasn't luck. That was technology. Roman agricultural texts describe copper treatments with technical precision. Columela's De Re Rustica, written in the 1st century CE, details vineyard management protocols that included copper-based fungicides. Grapevines treated with copper compounds showed dramatically reduced mildew damage. Yields in treated vineyards exceeded untreated controls by ratios documented in estate records. The Romans industrialized the process, establishing copper sulfate production facilities across wine-producing regions. This wasn't folk remedy. This was scaled agricultural infrastructure. When Roman viticulture collapsed in Western Europe after the empire's fragmentation, the knowledge persisted in monastic agriculture. Medieval monastery records describe copper treatments as standard practice for protecting high-value crops. The technology survived because it worked. In ancient China, rice farmers developed copper application methods specific to paddy conditions. Copper vessels were used for seed treatment before planting. Seeds soaked in copper solutions showed enhanced germination rates and reduced fungal infection during the vulnerable sprouting phase. Agricultural manuals from the Song dynasty describe these methods as established practice, not innovation. The technology was already old. Copper's antimicrobial properties were understood functionally, even without modern microbiology. Farmers knew that treated seeds produced healthier plants, denser stands, higher yields. The mechanism was irrelevant. The results were measurable. Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets include references to copper in agricultural contexts. Seed storage protocols, crop protection rituals that were actually chemical treatments described in religious language. Copper wasn't sacred. It was effective. The ritualization preserved technical knowledge across generations in cultures where literacy was restricted. When modern agronomists analyzed these ancient practices, they found functional chemistry disguised as ceremony. The ancients weren't superstitious. They were encoding survival technology in the only permanent format available. Copper sulfate solved logistics problems that still challenge modern agriculture. Fungal pathogens destroy crops during storage, transit, and field growth. A single contaminated shipment could collapse food security for entire regions. Copper treatments created a preservation system that required no refrigeration, no sealed containers, no complex infrastructure. Grain treated with trace copper compounds remained viable for years in ambient conditions. Ships could cross oceans. Armies could campaign for seasons. Cities could stockpile against siege. The strategic implications were enormous. Storage efficiency determined survival. A harvest that rotted before consumption was worthless. Copper extended the functional lifespan of stored food by inhibiting the microorganisms that caused spoilage. Farmers could hold crops for better market prices instead of panic selling fresh harvests. Governments could maintain strategic reserves. The technology created time. In agricultural economies, time was wealth. A society that could store food for 3 years had fundamentally different strategic options than one operating harvest to harvest. The treatment was scalable. A small farmer with a copper pot could treat seed stock. A large estate could treat entire warehouses. The same chemistry worked at every scale. No patents restricted access, no licensing limited application. Copper was abundant. Sulfur was common. Water was universal. The three-component system was geographically independent. Any agricultural society with basic metallurgy could implement it. That accessibility was the point. Survival technology that required rare inputs wasn't survival technology. It was privilege. Autosufficiency defined resilience. Communities that controlled their own food preservation didn't depend on external systems. Copper treatments were decentralized by nature. Knowledge transferred through observation and practice. A farmer who understood the method could teach neighbors, children, migrants. The technology spread horizontally, not hierarchically. No central authority controlled access. No supply chain could be weaponized. That independence made it dangerous to systems that required dependence. In 1845, Phytophthora infestans appeared in European potato crops. The pathogen spread faster than containment efforts. Ireland's population depended on potatoes as primary caloric base. Within months, the blight had contaminated fields across the island. Tubers rotted in the ground and in storage. The harvest failed. Then, failed again. Then again. Over 1 million people died. Another million emigrated. The population collapsed by 25% in 6 years. Copper sulfate would have stopped it. The compound's fungicidal properties were already documented in French viticulture by 1845. Bordeaux mixture, a copper sulfate and lime solution, was being used experimentally in vineyards to combat downy mildew. The same chemistry that protected grapevines could have protected potatoes. But the knowledge wasn't systematized. It wasn't distributed. It wasn't deployed. The technology existed while people starved. That wasn't coincidence. That was structural failure. The regions that survived had alternative food systems or early adoption of copper treatments. French farmers using Bordeaux mixture in the 1880s epidemic maintained yields while untreated fields collapsed. The difference wasn't soil quality or weather. It was chemistry. Swiss agricultural stations documented yield increases of 200–300% in copper-treated potato fields compared to untreated controls during blight years. 3 times the harvest. The same land, the same labor, 3 times the food. That wasn't incremental improvement. That was civilization-level technology. British colonial administrators documented the crisis in detail. They recorded the spread, the mortality, the collapse. They didn't deploy copper sulfate systematically. The treatment was known. It wasn't unknown science. It was unimplemented policy. The question isn't why they didn't know. The question is why they didn't act. Compare the inputs. Potatoes require approximately 287 liters of water per kilogram of yield. Copper-treated potatoes require the same water but produce 200–300% more yield per hectare during blight conditions. The water efficiency per calorie nearly triples. Land use efficiency increases proportionally. A farmer producing 15 tons per hectare without treatment produces 30–45 tons with copper sulfate during pathogen pressure. The same soil, the same rainfall, double or triple the food. The environmental cost is negligible compared to crop loss. Untreated fields that fail completely waste all inputs, all water, all labor, all land use. A total loss has infinite inefficiency. Copper application at recommended agricultural rates, 2 to 5 kilodor per hectare per season, prevents that loss. The copper remains in topsoil, providing residual antifungal effects for subsequent seasons. One application protects multiple cycles. Compare this to modern synthetic fungicides. Azoxystrobin, mancozeb, chlorothalonil. These require repeated applications, 5 to 8 treatments per season. Each application costs fuel, labor, equipment wear. The compounds degrade rapidly, requiring constant reapplication. They're profitable specifically because they don't persist. Copper persists. One application does the work of 8. That persistence makes it economically threatening to input suppliers. Government subsidies favor synthetic pesticides. Tax structures, research funding, regulatory frameworks all incentivize patented compounds over traditional methods. A farmer using copper sulfate receives no subsidies. A farmer purchasing branded fungicides qualifies for agricultural support programs. The economic system punishes effectiveness and rewards dependence. That's not accident. That's design. Modern agricultural science confirmed what ancient farmers knew empirically. Copper ions disrupt fungal cell membranes, interfere with enzyme systems, prevent spore germination. The mechanism is well documented. Studies from the 1960s through present consistently show copper sulfate effectiveness against a broad spectrum of plant pathogens: Phytophthora, Plasmopara, Alternaria, Botrytis. The compound works across fungal families. Peer-reviewed research from European agricultural institutes demonstrates that copper treatments reduce disease incidence by 70–95% in vulnerable crops. The data isn't disputed. The effectiveness isn't questioned. The regulatory classification is what changed. Copper went from agricultural tool to restricted substance, not because new science disproved its effectiveness, but because regulatory frameworks were rewritten. Toxicology studies show copper sulfate hazard profiles comparable to or better than many approved synthetic fungicides. The LD50, the dosage lethal to 50% of test subjects, is higher than commonly used alternatives. Environmental persistence, which regulators cite as concern, is actually an efficiency advantage. A compound that remains active for months requires fewer applications, less fuel consumption, less equipment use, lower carbon footprint per unit of disease prevention. Organic agriculture still uses copper compounds because nothing else works as effectively within certified parameters. When European regulators attempted to ban copper sulfate from organic protocols, farmer coalitions demonstrated that no viable alternative existed for controlling certain pathogens. The ban was postponed indefinitely. The compound is irreplaceable in specific applications, yet it remains heavily restricted, licensed, monitored. A farmer can't simply purchase and apply the same chemistry Romans used freely. The economic structure doesn't reward effectiveness. It rewards participation in input supply chains. A farmer who solves problems with accessible, persistent solutions reduces dependency on annual purchases. That independence is economically threatening to agricultural supply industries. Seed companies, chemical manufacturers, equipment suppliers, all profit from technologies that require continuous reinvestment. Copper sulfate requires one purchase. That's the problem. Classification systems determine accessibility. When copper sulfate was reclassified from agricultural input to regulated chemical, the language changed. Heavy metal contamination replaced disease prevention. The compound didn't change. The framing changed. A technology that had been normal for 3,000 years became dangerous in regulatory language written over 3 decades. The chemistry remained identical. The economic context shifted. Patent law can't protect naturally occurring compounds. Corporations can't own copper sulfate. They can own synthesis methods for novel fungicides. They can license application protocols for proprietary formulations. They can patent delivery systems for trademarked products. But they can't patent the copper sulfate molecule. That unpatentability makes it worthless to industries structured around intellectual property monopolies. A solution that can't be owned is a solution that can't be monetized through artificial scarcity. This pattern repeats across agricultural technologies. Bordeaux mixture, the copper sulfate and lime combination that saved European viticulture in the 1880s, is now restricted in many jurisdictions. Sulfur, another ancient fungicide, faces increasing regulation despite millennia of safe use. Both are effective, accessible, unpatentable. Both are being systematically marginalized in favor of synthetic alternatives that cost more, work temporarily, and require continuous repurchase. The same cycle eliminated saltpeter as accessible fertilizer, replaced traditional seed saving with patented genetics, transformed open-pollinated varieties into proprietary hybrids. Every shift moved control from farmers to suppliers. Every reclassification transferred knowledge from common practice to licensed expertise. The technologies didn't fail. They were failed by systems that couldn't profit from their accessibility. Look at lima beans, reclassified from staple to specialty crop despite superior protein density and nitrogen-fixing properties. Look at amaranth, marginalized despite drought resistance and complete amino acid profile. Look at traditional grain storage methods using ash and clay, replaced by chemical fumigants. The pattern is consistent. Accessible, effective, unpatentable solutions are systematically reclassified as primitive, dangerous, or inefficient. Then they're replaced by patented alternatives that solve the same problems less efficiently at higher cost. Climate projections show increasing pathogen pressure. Warmer, wetter conditions favor fungal diseases. Crop losses to pathogens are expected to increase 15–30% by 2050 under moderate climate scenarios. Modern fungicides are losing effectiveness as resistance develops. Pathogens evolve faster than patent offices approve new compounds. The agricultural system is approaching a crisis point where chemical controls stop working. When synthetic fungicides fail, copper will still work. The resistance mechanisms that defeat modern compounds don't overcome copper's multipathway cellular disruption. Fungi can't evolve resistance to copper ions the way they develop resistance to single-target synthetic molecules. That's why organic agriculture still depends on it. That's why it's still used despite regulatory hostility. When everything else fails, copper remains effective. Water scarcity will force yield optimization. Every liter of irrigation water will need to produce maximum calories. Crop losses to disease will be unacceptable when water itself is scarce. Technologies that triple yields without increasing water input will shift from optional to mandatory. The regulatory frameworks restricting copper use will face practical collapse when food security depends on maximizing disease-resistant harvests. The knowledge is preserved in organic farming communities, in historical agricultural texts, in the patent-free chemistry that anyone can reproduce. When centralized agricultural supply chains fail under climate pressure, resource scarcity, or economic collapse, the technologies that survive will be the ones that don't require external dependencies. Copper sulfate requires copper, sulfur, water, and knowledge. All four exist outside corporate control. The return won't be voluntary. It will be forced by the failure of systems that prioritized profit over function. When harvests fail and populations face food insecurity, the debate over regulatory classification becomes irrelevant. A starving society doesn't care about patent law. It cares about yields. Copper sulfate triples yields. That fact hasn't changed in 3,000 years. The economic systems that tried to bury it will collapse before the chemistry stops working. If this vault revealed what they buried under regulation and reclassification, subscribe to preserve the knowledge they tried to marginalize. Understanding only survives when it's remembered and practiced. The next vault opens soon.